My name is Caitlin Yes. I am the summer naturalist at Dorothy Pico Nature Center, and today for Lunchbox Naturalist I'll be talking about Keystone Species. I won't be able to cover all of the Keystone Species as its unofficial designation, and you could argue about any animal that it's a Keystone Species to its environment. But I will be talking specifically about frogs, beavers, wolves, and then I'll be finishing our talk as I talk about bees, and I'll show you our beehive at the Nature Center. So thank you for joining me today. So as you could see earlier, I had our water feature below us outside the window, and that's what we showed you as you came in. Our water feature serves as a mini ecosystem for one of the first animals that I'm going to introduce as a Keystone Species to you today. So maybe you've never heard of the term Keystone Species. And so for my research I did, all of the article I looked at was from National Geographic, and they described a Keystone Species as an organism, so something that's living, that was crucial for its environment to continue to exist. So without that animal or plant or maybe fungus, the whole ecosystem could potentially collapse. So as we look at our water feature, I'm going to bring your attention to our frogs. Most of the amphibians we have at the Nature Center are tree frogs, or we have American toads, which aren't necessarily frogs, but they look very similar. They're just a little less prone to stay in the water. And you can see I have pictures here of the life stages of a frog. So we have the egg, the tadpole, or this is actually a froglet because it has the little legs, and then an actual frog. Frogs are what I would call a canary in the coal mine. So canaries were used by miners to monitor the air quality within the mine. So if the canary stopped singing, it meant they might have hit a natural gas leak, or the air quality had become so bad that they needed to leave the mine immediately or they could suffocate or die. So a frog serves as a canary in the coal mine for the water in an ecosystem. Frogs have permeable skin. So they take in water through their skin and it affects everything within their bodies. So if your water quality is poor, either there are toxins within the water, so chemicals, or if maybe the water has become too rich in oxygen or too poor in oxygen, it could affect the frog species living in that environment. Scientists typically, when measuring the health of an ecosystem, will look at the frog populations to see how they're doing. Because as soon as the frog populations decline, it's going to indicate that your ecosystem is much less healthy, and it's going to impact all of the species within that environment. The other three species are going to fall into three main categories of Keystone Species. So we have predators, engineers, and mutualists are the three main categories that most Keystone Species could fall into. Predators are going to be a Keystone Species and crucial because their hunting behaviors take down populations that might otherwise severely impact different parts of the ecosystem. So for that, we're going to talk about wolves. We don't necessarily have a lot of wolves in Iowa. You're probably more familiar with coyotes, which are kind of a similar species. But wolves are native to northern Minnesota and kind of northern regions of the US just above us. So because wolf ranges of hunting do vary, they could come down and pass through this area or kind of infrequently visit. We have a wolf pelt at the Nature Center. So he's very large. You could see he's as big as I am. Well, his pelt is anyways. And it's very soft. And wolves are a threatened species in most of their habitats. So because wolves have a tendency to prey on livestock, farmers have hunted them in most of their environments and habitats to prevent that from happening and protect their livelihood. The catch is, with the decrease of the wolf populations, large herbivores like deer and moose tend to overrun the habitat. In northern Minnesota, you might have heard of Mackinac Island. So I got the chance to visit a wolf preservation space in northern Minnesota, and they were talking about the reintroduction of wolves into that ecosystem. There are a lot of moose on Mackinac Island, and when the wolf population decreased and almost died out, they only had 2 wolves on the island at that point. The moose population skyrocketed, and they overgrazed the area and wiped out a lot of vegetation, which then impacts your smaller herbivores because they lose their habitat or their homes and their food source to those larger herbivores like moose. So wolves are very important for that. There's also a reintroduction program in Yellowstone. They were originally a smaller form of wolf, a Rocky Mountain wolf, but because that population had been wiped out almost, or had to flee that area, they reintroduced the Canadian wolf, which is 10% bigger. So that's also having a varied impact on the other animals in that ecosystem because it wasn't what was there previously. And you can see in my hand, we have a wolf paw kind of imprint. So that's what their paw print would look like in the wild. Our next animal that I'm going to be talking about is the beaver. So we also have beaver pelts at the Nature Center. They're very slick, kind of almost a little oily because they're meant to kind of have the water shed right off of this fur. So beavers, you might have guessed, are the engineers of different ecosystems. So beavers are well known to make dams. So as they create this dam, they have to take down different trees. So as they cut down this tree, it takes away some of the competition for sunlight and other soil resources so that new trees are able to grow and the ecosystem replenishes itself in a natural balance. Additionally, those dams create kind of a floodplain that allows for a swampy area where a lot of animals like to live that may not otherwise have that habitat. There are a lot of native species that like that kind of habitat that have lost a lot of its population because of the decline within those wetland areas. And typically beavers are also an animal that's considered a nuisance. So because their dams maybe are not what we would want in our farmland or other areas, their dams are taken down and they're forced to move or leave, or they're hunted for their pelts. And we're going to actually now continue, and we're going to walk down to our bee colony. And as we walk, you'll get to see the Nature Center, which maybe you've missed getting to see since we've been closed. So we have multiple other things. And we actually have another beaver on display right here. So this beaver was caught when she was pregnant, and so we also have all of her little babies that were within her when she was accidentally caught. And now, as I continue down, you'll pretty see it in just a second, we have the prairie grassland kind of exhibit. So all of the animals and things, keystone species I've talked about today, have been animals. But this isn't always the case. Plants can also be a keystone species to a habitat, and a lot of our prairie grasslands are considered a keystone species for that habitat because so many animals need those prairie grasslands to continue to thrive. A lot of our snakes and turtles that we have on exhibit at the Nature Center really like that kind of ecosystem. Prairie dogs, burrowing owls, It's a very diverse ecosystem that many animals rely on. And you can kind of take a look at and see what kind of animals we have on display hidden within this ecosystem. All right, so for our last keystone species that I will introduce today, I'm going to show you our bee colony. So we have honeybees here at the Nature Center, but they're not actually a native species to this area. They're convenient because they make a crop that everyone loves, honey, and they also serve as important pollinators introduced to the area. But we do have native bees that do live in the area and help pollinate different plants. And there are some plants that are specifically designed so that they introduce bees and welcome bees to come in and pollinate them. So some of very common crops that you may have heard of or like to eat rely on the bee populations to help pollinate them. So if you've ever enjoyed almonds or almond milk, that crop relies on the bee populations, which are declining. So they face habitat loss. A lot of people don't like clover. Clover is a necessity for the pollen, and different wildflowers are what bees use to eat the pollen and create their honey. So without those weeds, they can't continue. Additionally, the pesticides you put on those weeds could affect the bees. So we have that problem. There is a fungus out there that will come somehow attach to the bees, and it will come back to the hive and decrease the population. And they also face natural predators like hive beetles. So as you look at our bee colony, you'll notice it's not necessarily what you kind of picture in the television with the round bulb. That's because it's a manufactured hive. So we have slates like this where they build their comb on top of. And they buzz around in here, and there are different cells for the larva, for honey, and for pollen, among other things. Bees are the last topic of keystone species, and they're called mutualists. So as I hinted at before, the bees rely on flowers, wildflowers, to create their honey and pollen and to eat the nectar of the plant to survive. But the flowers also rely on bees as natural pollinators so that they can regenerate and grow. So if you want to zoom in, you can kind of see some of the bees as they go about their day. You'll notice there's a couple of them that they're shaking quite a bit. This happens when the bees go outside and they find a food source. They'll come in and they'll dance. So they'll do a dance, and that is sending a message to the other bees of where it's located so that they can go out and find that plant. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, I will try to answer them in the comments. If I have to do research, I will do it, and I will get back to you within the comments. So thank you so much for your time. Bye.